Hello and welcome to your live stream. I say your live stream because without you, the viewer, the listener, none of this would be possible. So big thanks going into the show to you all for supporting this live stream and indeed my channel. Welcome to the show in the aftermath of a climactic Austrian Grand Prix on the Tuesday before the British Grand Prix. It's the other way of seeing the glass half full, I suppose. Lots to talk about for sure. Lots to talk about the Austrian Grand Prix. Lots to talk about going into Silverstone as well, with George winning just before the British Grand Prix, with Lando having won this year and fighting for the lead with Max Verstappen, and Lewis Hamilton not looking too slow either going into Silverstone. So lots to talk about in that respect. Lots to talk about with Austria. So with no more ado, let's get on to our normal format of bringing up your questions from YouTube chat. Just get that organized as I speak. Where are we? Here we go. The first question is from Lee Kambanga. I'm doing it in the order in which you all queued up. I think that's the simplest way of doing it. So I've always done it, and I guess it's the fairest way. Hi, Peter. And I've got to say here from the outset, it doesn't matter if you join this show, if you go away and come back and you miss something, and indeed for upcoming shows, if you join it halfway through, still ask the question you want to ask. I'm sure there'll be many questions about the Max Lando shunt, and we can deal with all of those. So don't be afraid to ask the same question twice if you see what I mean. Hi Peter, do you think Max's pit wall informed him that Lando was under investigation for track limits? It was obvious Lando was going to have a 5-second penalty. I don't think Max could have. Oh, it's another one here, just another part to this question. Defended like that if he knew. I also think that the RB20 isn't the best car now, considering what Checo's doing. Max is just extracting a lot from the car. Maybe they should have evolved the RB19 instead. Well, several parts to those questions. The first is that I think the timing was very, very close to the actual timing of the accident. In other words, it appeared on screen, and we now know, about 35 seconds, I think, after the actual impact, in which they were effectively then out of the race, even though Max kept going, as we know. Which means that in terms of that's letting the public know, so in theory, the teams or the FIA had made the decision maybe a minute before that, say the FIA, the stewards. So the question is, how quickly did that information get to Red Bull? How quickly did it get to McLaren? And my guess is that they probably did know about it almost at the point when the shunt was taking place, maybe a little bit before. But I think there's this thing in Formula One as well of not talking to the driver when he's in the corners or under pressure, and they tend to do it on the straights. So to give Red Bull as much benefit as we possibly can, obviously for a missed opportunity here, you could say that they were waiting for the right moment to tell Max. And that's why they were a bit late. I mean, it's an interesting one, isn't it? Because if you watch the World Rally Championship, you hear the co-drivers talking incessantly to the drivers. It's all, oh, you left, you can't actually hear a word they're saying, or I can't understand a word they're saying. They're on the radio link, and no matter what the guy's doing, whether he's upside down or sideways in midair, they're just going, usually in another language. And it seems that the drivers in World Rally Championship don't mind at all having this incessant chatter in their ears. And yet in Formula One, they're all a bit precious about that. And fair enough, I can remember the first time we ran radios on Nigel's car at Williams. We were at Imola testing, and I think David Brown said something, radio check or something, and Nigel was in the middle of Tamburello and got back on the radio and said, "Don't ever talk to me in the middle of a quick corner again." Fair enough, that's where it all started probably. But so I'm giving Red Bull the benefit of the doubt. But I think the real problem there, as I said in the chat I had with Cameron yesterday, and as I said many times actually since the Alex Peroni shunt at Monza a few years ago in GP3, when he was nearly killed because they had those ridiculous sausage curbs on the outside of the parabolic where it just launched his car and he came down on top of the guardrail basically on the outside. And I did a big thing then about, we should have electronic sensors everywhere, and we shouldn't be just relying on the human eye and the infallibility of curbs when they're covered with dust and all sorts of stuff and may even be breaking up a bit. And and I said then we should have photo cells under sensors, and we should make it part of the TV show that as the car goes over the sensor, it's either green, or let's not have green because there'd be too many of them in theory, but it goes red if he's over the thing, and everybody can see it in real time, including the teams on the pit wall. And I said that, 4 years ago now, and nothing's happened as far as I can see. I don't even know how electronic it is now in terms of the sensors. I don't think there are that many. Maybe a couple of corners, but I don't think a lot. And we're only talking 1 or 2 key corners per lap, per circuit, and not all the circuits anyway. So I don't know why they haven't done that. There's a lot of things I suggest that they don't do, so no surprise there, I suppose. This is one of Windsor's suggestions. We better not do that. We'll go the other way and never have them. But look at the trouble it's caused. Absolutely. I mean, as I said, I was doing that video after the race, and literally the thing came up on my iPhone as I was talking, about this penalty for Lando, and I thought, wow, what a missed opportunity there for Red Bull. Having said all of that, let's just think about this, because if they'd said to Max, as their sort of top speed on that straight approaching turn 3, if they'd said to Max, 5-second penalty for Lando, what would he have done at that point? Would he have just immediately backed off and waved Lando past? Or would he have done what he did, actually, and just go into the corner, sort of brake without locking anything up and just keeping the car nice and stable and just staying in the middle of the road? And would he have done anything different? He might have let him past on the next straight. And equally, from Lando's point of view, if he knew he had the penalty, I suppose he would be, he'd be doing his dive bombing, wouldn't he? Trying to get past on every corner and trying to get the 5-second lead when he got in front. So, I don't know. To me, it's a missed opportunity. They haven't made track limit sensors part of the TV show in the way that a lot of other telemetry is these days, and I just don't get that. I think it should be, and I think that's the reason we're having this discussion now. In terms of the RB20, RB19, I think they've done the right thing with the RB20. I think it is an improvement, and if you look at, I was just reading through the Pirelli guide to Silverstone just before we went live, and I hadn't realized they're saying that cornering loads have gone up 10% in 12 months if they look at where they were this time last year, and that's quite a lot considering there have been no changes in the regulations. So yeah, on that basis the RB20 is got more downforce and more grunt than an RB19, so I think that's fair enough. What we're seeing is what I've always said, again, for the last 2 or 3 years, there's a limit to what everybody, including Red Bull, is going to be able to do. I'm just going to try and not move my hands too much. And this is a complete aside now, and for those who are listening now, switch off, because this is to do with video. I say listening because it does go out as a podcast this later on. Whenever I move my hands, the camera lens that I use seems to take up the exposure, seems to change the exposure. If I then put my hands down, the exposure is different. So I'm going to try to get through this entire live stream without moving my hands at all, if I can do that. Oh no, it's just gone there. The exposure's gone there. You see, it's weird, isn't it? Now it's gone back. It's very annoying for perfectionists like myself. Anyway, there you go. So now it's back to normal, I think, hopefully. But there is this limit that you can reach, I think, and we've never really been in this situation. If we have, it's been a long time in Formula One when we've had a regulation where there haven't been any changes basically for the 3 years leading up to the change, and everybody knows it's going to be a change in 2026, and we knew that back in 2022. And so quite obviously there's kind of a finite limit to what you can do given the additional variable restraints of cost cap and having to prepare the car for 2026, the all-new car. So given all of that, it's no surprise that Red Bull's margin is getting smaller and smaller, and sometimes is being exceeded on some circuits, because no car, regardless of Adrian Newey or not, is going to be perfect at every racetrack, given the limitations of cost cap and testing and everything else. So it's no surprise that when seeing now, I'm not going to say on occasions, but at specific circuits, cars actually proving at some stage of the race, or maybe even in qualifying but not the race, to be quicker than a Red Bull. We haven't yet seen a car, I think it's fair to say, that is quicker than a Red Bull at every phase of the weekend. In other words, Friday, Saturday and Sunday in every phase of the race. But we've seen Red Bull in various moments of pressure when they haven't got things quite right, or they haven't got the car perfect on a specific compound within the Pirelli range, And then we're going to see more and more of that because of this limit. Sorry, I moved my hand. I better not. Because of this limit of the brick wall at the end of the 2025 season when these regulations come to a halt. So, and the reason, and I said that hasn't, I don't think that's really happened ever, because it's always been, the changes have been large, but not as significant as the 2026 changes are going to be, which is a completely new engine, completely new car. And so up to that, they're saying that to the teams, we won't put any pressure on you to have to make regulatory changes to the current cars. And that's why it's getting closer and closer. Hope that kind of explains it. So the next one, complete change of pace. Good to hear, good to see. Philip Roos says, Musso, Collins or Hawthorne? Brilliant. Thank you very much, Philippe. Now, somebody's going to say, oh, he's obviously a mate of yours, Windsor, to put in a question like that. I have to say, I'm ashamed to say I don't know Philip Roos, but I'm very impressed with what he's doing there to break up the monotony of all this other stuff. And it reminds me of, and I've been meaning to say this for quite a while, it reminds me of after the US Open, Bryson DeChambeau, there was an interview with Bryson, and he was talking about how at various stages of his career, in his golf bag, he's named his clubs after various great golfers or golfers that he admired from the past. So the 5-iron would be a Bobby Jones, or the 6-iron would be a Tiger Woods, or the 1-wood would be a Jack Nicklaus. And it was interesting. I would say 50% of the names that he had given his clubs were from golfers who had played prior to 1960. And I just had the thought, I wonder how many of today's Formula One stars, if they were asked to name 10 drivers prior to 1960 that they admired, how many would be able to come up with even one name, let alone 2 or 3? They'd probably say Fangio, I guess, and they might say Nuvolari at a push, but I think most of them be struggling. The point I'm trying to make is that there's not enough respect for the past in Formula One, mainly because Bernie has just brushed it under the table for the last 30 years, and that's permeated right through the sport, right through to the next younger generation coming into Formula One. And it's just considered to be quite cool not to know anything about the past and just say glibly, oh, well, it's before my time, which is what a lot of them say, of course. And that's no excuse at all, because without history and without those drivers, we wouldn't be where we are today. And so thank you very much for this question, Musso, Collins or Hawthorne. From those three, I mean, it's an interesting one. I mean, obviously, 58 was a pivotal year for those three. Well, it was a calamitous year for 2 of them, because Luigi Musso lost his life in the 58 French Grand Prix, Peter Collins the 58 German Grand Prix, and Mike Hawthorne went on to win the 58 Drivers' Championship, and then lose his life a few months later in a road accident in January 59. Collins, Hawthorne, very close friends, in a way that you wouldn't say Max and Lando are good friends. They were, they've got a lot in common, and they have a few laughs prior to Austria 2024. But Peter Collins and Mike Hawthorne were really close, and they were real friends to one another and supported one another. So you can imagine the devastation for Mike Hawthorne when Peter was killed. Just after winning the British Grand Prix, I mean, just think about it. He won the British Grand Prix, this blonde-haired hero of a British racing driver winning the British Grand Prix in a red Ferrari, and then 2 weeks later he loses his life in the German Grand Prix. It's unthinkable today. I mean, I don't even want to think about it, but that's what happened. And Mike Hawthorne had to live through that and went on to win the championship. And Luigi Musso was a classic Italian Ferrari driver who had a few gambling debts and a few other idiosyncrasies, and was under a lot of pressure going into the 58 French Grand Prix to retain his place in the Ferrari factory team. And famously, Enzo said, right, this is a big race for us in terms of prize money. It was one of the biggest races of the season. Get out there and let's do it. And I think he just tried to go through that first right-hander flat and ran wide onto the grass, as a lot of Formula One drivers do today, not necessarily onto the grass, but onto the runoff area. But in the case of Rins in 58, it tipped the car over, he was thrown out and killed. Move my hands. Exposure's changed. I think you're asking who was quicker of the 3. I've been a big Peter Collins fan for a long time, and so I'd have to give the nod to Peter Collins there. I think he's underrated, massively underrated, when people talk about great drivers from the past and some of the great drivers of all time. I always think Peter Collins, considering his considering how difficult it was just to get into Formula One and do well in an incredibly dangerous era, I think Peter Collins was a great combination of enthusiasm, natural talent, a gentleman, humility, and good manners, and in many ways is my personification of how a racing driver should be. And so, yeah, I mean, nothing against Mike Hawthorn either. I think Hawthorn was probably underrated as well. Looks to me, I never saw him drive, but it looks to me like he was a little bit more oversteery than Peter Collins, and loved to just sort of Keke Rosberg style, I think. Loved to just drive on the left rear, bit of Jochen Rindt in there. So Hawthorn should not be on. I know Patrick Head always rated Mike Hawthorn very highly, and Patrick's sort of driver, I think. So thanks for that, Philippe Rust. Very good. Jay says, hi Peter, seen you chat with that camera in Formula One about DRS. Isn't that a necessity with these huge cars? Is there something better besides trimming the cars down? Seems to have made drivers weaker in attack. Well, when you say something better, what would be wrong with not having it at all? I don't see why we need to have DRS. As Max has shown, and as other drivers have shown, when we don't, there's a big toe effect with today's cars, and because they're quite big, as a matter of fact, and so the car in front is taking a lot of air, and if you sit behind that car, there for sure is a toe effect. Absolutely. I mean, if we're coming to Baku shortly, and just imagine the toe effect without DRS of the car behind, in the second place car. And there is a big toe effect. So why do we need to magnify that all the time, times 5 or whatever it is, with DRS, and have these absurd speed differentials, which are the cause of a lot of the trouble, and take away a lot of the artistic skill of a proper overtake, and also remove completely the art of defense. And so, that's my point. I'm not saying we need to replace DRS with anything. I just get rid of it completely. And the whole point of this regulation was to make the cars easier to follow. They're not quite as easy to follow now as they were perhaps in 2022 when they were bouncing all over the road, and they've added a few bits of aero now which have made the cars a bit more aggressive aerodynamically. But they're still pretty good. And I still come back to my thing. A, it's artificial, which I don't like, and B, I think it detracts from both attack and the skill of both attack and defense. And I think a lot of what we saw in Austria, all that dive bombing, and it wasn't just Max and Lando, it was everywhere. It was the Alpines, it was the Haas Ferraris, it was everybody. Anyone's running closely, it's going to get a massive DRS thing, particularly around Austria. And I just think it's so crass. Actually, it's so obvious and in your face. It's just like, oh well, we're ticking all those boxes, look how many overtakes we had. But were they real overtakes? They weren't. They were just one car going past another with huge speed differential. And then you get these absurd DRS trains where everybody's in DRS and it means nothing, and it neutralizes the whole thing. So my point is, I'm when I criticize something, I always try to be positive and try to come up with an objective opinion, and to be positive about something that could be better if it was done a different way. My positive solution to DRS is don't replace it with anything. That's my positive solution. Jay continues, wasn't it more erratic inside-outside line movement and thus not committing to a line, and then not the dive bomb itself that annoyed Max? It falls into your statement on thinking about your attack. Well, yeah, I mean, because you are a bit of a passenger with this huge speed differential. It's kind of, whoa, there's the guy, he's going much slower than I am, shall I go left or right? It's not like a carefully planned passing maneuver, a Nigel Mansell, I'm going to double dummy Nelson Piquet and go left, then right, then left, then right. It's none of that. It's all just, whoa, where am I going to go? Oh, he's in the middle, I better go to the left, or there's a bit of room on the right. And it's all exacerbated by that ridiculous speed differential we're getting from DRS. And it's worse on corners where you've got a very high speed approach into a very tight corner with a heavy braking area. That's the problem. And it's not as bad when it's a medium speed corner, but when it's very heavy braking, that's when you get these huge speed differentials. And it's it's very annoying. It's very annoying for people that enjoy and appreciate good overtaking and good defense, like me, and I think like a lot of other viewers as well. Jay's continuing, how realistic would it be if Max were to look at this field with these non-committing overtakers and think to himself, this is not just racing, and just calls it quits for an extended period at season's end? Well, a lot of people I noticed that Andrea Stella's now saying, oh, Max is just proving what everybody on the planet knows, it's all back to 2021 again. And I was thinking, I'm just going to raise the height of the seat. Hang on one second. It's another issue. I'm going to have to get a new seat here as well. Either that or I'm putting too much weight into it. All that muscle. Yeah, right. 2021 all over again. And I was thinking, what planet is he on? I mean, 2021, my main complaint about Max was in Saudi Arabia. Because by that end of the championship, I think Helmut Marko and maybe a few others were in his ear saying, look, if you're in a situation with Lewis and you're both going down to the first chicane or whatever it is, remember you're ahead on points. If you're out of the race, no damage for you. If he's out of the race, big result for you. So, don't be too worried about, being aggressive. And I really gave Max a hard time about that. Max, and I think the advisors to whom he was listening a hard time about that. And so that's completely different to what was going on in Austria, because Max was in front and there wasn't a question of being aggressive, and it was a defense thing in Austria. So how suddenly Austria leads us back to the whole world knew in 2021 what Max Verstappen was like. I just don't get that at all. And then getting back to 2024, I think Max might think that. Yes, I think he would, because he's not one of these guys that probably thinks that. Well, I'm sure he thinks DRS is terrible, and I'm sure he thinks that overtaking is an art, because he's really good at overtaking. Just look at his pass on Lando in the sprint race as a good example. And if you're good at something and then it's neutralized by regulations, what are you going to feel? You're going to feel this is, waste of time. It's interesting. Lewis, I'm sure, loves DRS now because he's in a position where it can sometimes be advantageous to him. But whether or not he would like it if he was at the front of races all the time, and you've got your hard-earned pole and your hard-earned 3-second lead in the second lap, and all of a sudden DRS is activated and suddenly you're P2. Whether you'd enjoy it then, I don't know. To me, that's just so juvenile that it's making Formula One, it's reducing Formula One to the lowest common denominator, and I just don't like it at all. I just think if you've earned the pole and you've earned a good first lap or a good second lap, and then DRS comes into play, and you then lose it just because of DRS, there's something wrong with DRS and the whole idea. And there is, of course, something wrong with it. It wouldn't be a completely stupid idea for Max to do that, because he's got to think about the rest of his career as well, and what's going to happen in 26 and beyond, and who's going to have the best car there. And I don't think anybody knows how 26 is going to go. There's a lot of people out there saying, oh, Mercedes is bound to have the best engine. Well, I'm not so sure about that. I think Red Bull will do a pretty good job. I can't imagine Honda will do a bad job. And I guess Ferrari will do a pretty good job as well. I'm not sure about Renault, but Ferrari. And but nobody really knows. If Max was actually sitting out and was a free agent, I think he could get to drive whatever he wanted in 2027 if he wanted to. But there'll be no reason for him to stop at the end of this year, because Red Bull's still a very good team. They've got the momentum that they've had over the last 5, 6, 7, 10 years. And that will continue with or without Adrian. And it's going to continue because the regulations are not changing very much. So you'd have to say Max is looking good till the end of 25. But then there is an argument for him to say, back end of 25, I'm going to take the year off and come back in 27. See who's doing a good job. Why not? He's earned himself that privilege, really, isn't he? Go and do some rallying. Yeah, it'd be good. I asked him about rallying, and he said, the trees are a problem. Spoken like a true F1 driver. Yeah, he's right, of course. The trees. I don't know how many people watch the Rally of Poland, but watching just the speed they're doing through those narrow roads with trees both sides and spectators. Luckily, they did cancel some of the stage of the spectators. Just unbelievable what they're doing. Okay, Gandalf the Fool. Peter, hope you're well. I am very much, Gandalf, thank you. Regarding the incident between Max and Lando, had we had a smaller and more nimble car from the mid-2000s, we probably wouldn't have had these incidents. Well, that's right. I mean, it wasn't really a pass, was it? It was just two cars touching wheels and punctures straight away. I mean, it's a shame they got the puncture, wasn't it? Sometimes you see cars bash into one another and nothing happens and they continue, albeit like Sergio Perez in the race, damage on the side pod, moaning about understeer for the rest of the race. But in general, they seem to bash them around and get away with it. But in this occasion, the tyre went, and that was that. If the tyre hadn't gone and Lewis and Max had continued and Lando hadn't had any issues either, really, it would have been, would we still be talking about that specific incident? Probably not. It's just that it did define the race. And as you say, with more nimble, smaller cars from the mid-2000s, and in theory, going forward, right? 26 onwards, they're supposed to be a bit more nimble and smaller. So will that shunt occur with a 26 car? That's another point. Well, my answer to that is, well, if they continue with DRS, I think it will. Because it's just like you're in no man's land when you're in the DRS toe and you're going into a higher speed braking area, very, very hard braking, then you're a passenger really in terms of where you're going to place the car and what you can do with that. Okay, Gandalf the Fool says there is an overhead shot video on the internet shows Max pointed the car slightly to the left once he saw Lando going to the outside line just to squeeze him a bit. Going on to the next one, Lando probably didn't expect that and didn't react enough, and hence the incident. Not sure how that would be a penalty for Max though. Seems like a racing incident to me. Well, yeah, I mean, I studied the onboard and looked at it frame by frame, and it's very difficult to see Max making any movement at all with the steering wheel to the left. I think because the track slightly opens up there on the overhead, it does look as if he moves slightly to the left, but I don't think it's a steering wheel input actually. But even if it is, as you say, if that's what they're measuring penalties on, then good luck is all I can say, because they're talking about absolute minimal movement of the steering wheel and tiny movement of the car. It doesn't come under the heading, I don't think, of moving under braking. But obviously Johnny Herbert and the stewards thought it did, and that's why they gave him the penalty. From Lando's point of view, he was a victim of DRS. He was in that sort of no man's land where he wasn't going to be able to overtake there. Maybe he could do the undercut if Max ran a little bit wide, which we don't know if he was or he wasn't going to do that. And he had quite a lot of room, He had enough room on the left to move the steering wheel, 3 degrees to the left and avoid the contact. But I think one of the reasons he didn't do that is because he had all this speed differential and he'd come from so far back. And it's very difficult. It's very difficult. It's very easy to sit in an armchair and look at those video replays in slow-mo and say, oh, why isn't Lando there? Or why isn't Max here? Why? But when it's actually happening in real time and you're experiencing the massive speed differential that Lando's experiencing, it's very difficult accurately to place a car in a perfect position all the time. And that's why I made a point on the interview with Cameron that when Max was defending prior to that shunt, going into 4 mainly, and Lando was getting more and more annoyed and saying he's weaving under braking or moving under braking, it's dangerous and all this stuff. I made the point that for me, watching Max and what he was doing, he was absolutely pin sharp perfect in the way he was moving the car just a fraction, just to sort of not intimidate Lando, but let Lando know that he knew where he was. And at the same time, he was just opening up the corner just a fraction, so it fell under the heading of that's part of his racing line anyway. And I thought, I've never seen a driver do that well with such good timing, which makes me wonder why, Stella would say, Andrea Stella would say, this is the Max Verstappen from 21, now everybody on the globe knows what sort of... To me, that was absolute poetry in motion, what he was doing. Maybe I'm watching a different race to everybody else, or I'm seeing it, I don't know what's going on, but for me, that was absolutely beautiful to watch. That was real defense. Absolutely perfect within the letter of what you're allowed to do. That was my taking. And I'm assuming that the stewards thought, I'm going to have to do another of these chair things, hang on. I'm assuming that the stewards also thought so, because they didn't give him a penalty for that, did they? They were too busy looking at Lando going over the track limits. Okay, Gandalf the Fool. Another question. It's a bit out of the blue, this one. Finally, a question. What's your take on turn 3 at the Nürburgring? 1, 2... What is 3? Is that the right-hander after the long left? I was watching some onboard laps from the past and noticed how much later Jensen turns in compared to Kimi. Well, yeah, I mean, Jensen was always a long corner driver, long as Carlos Sainz. But with Sergio Perez's level of throttle application, linear throttle application, really, really good loading of the left rear, the loaded rear. That was Jensen's great hallmark, in my opinion. But long corners, longer than Lando's. And I'm impressed that you saw that. I mean, I don't remember that exact comparison, but Kimi, that would have been a corner where Kimi would have been shortening the corner, because it's quite a long straight after that downhill straight into the left-hander. And I thought that was a great Kimi corner. So yeah, well noticed and no surprise at all. Jensen was that. And that next left-hander, by the way, that downhill left-hander, was the first time I remember watching Michael using the paddle shift and left foot braking in a way that I'd never seen anybody doing it before, and changing gear mid-corner and settling the car, using the left foot brake just to get the car rotated beautifully. And I remember watching a practice session there and thinking, wow, this is the new era. This is the new era, because we've got paddle shifts combined with left foot braking. Rubens, of course, was still running right foot braking right up to the end of his Ferrari career. I think even at Williams, actually, I may be wrong. But and Braun, I think he definitely had right foot braking. But Michael, that was the first time I'd seen left foot braking combined with paddle, and it was such a breakthrough moment on that left hand at the Nürburgring. New Nürburgring we're talking about, because I don't think we ever called the corners at the old circuit, the Nordschleife, by a turn number, did we? It was always Schwagenbach and Flugplatz and Franzgarten. And yeah. I always remember, I'm sure no one will laugh at this, but okay, I'll start with Piers Thin, who we all know now is doing a brilliant job running the McLaren factory, basically, or the company as well. I think with the race team, he effectively half runs the race team, in that he's the factory guy that makes it all happen, and he runs the factory in the company. Great guy. He's the son of Sheridan Thin, with whom I spent many wonderful years at Williams, my colleague at Williams. And Sheridan was one of the first great friends of Frank Williams back in the mid 60s. And Sheridan used to race a Mini Cooper, so what more can you say? How good is that? Anyway, Sheridan and I were very good friends with Anthony Marsh, who used to be the commentator at all the Grand Prix, the sort of Bob Constanduros of Formula One in those days, and he was the race commentator. And it's Anthony Marsh's voice you hear, for example, in throughout Grand Prix, the movie, and they're all dubs that Anthony Marsh did, but John Frankenheimer wanted the noise, the voice of the man who actually did the PA, and that was Anthony Marsh. And he was always known as Bunter, for a reason, as in Billy Bunter, for reasons that we won't go into too deeply, but I've got to say, he was an incredibly good man, Anthony Marsh. Did a massive amount of work for the Springfield Boys Club, for example. Very, very pushy in getting people to go along there every winter and give their time and donations, and just a good man, and a bit opinionated and a bit sort of, Bunter summed him up quite well. And anyway, I was with Sheridan on race morning at Nürburgring at the old Nordschleife. And we wanted to get hold of Anthony Marsh and tell him something. It was something to do with the team, Williams or whatever. And we said to... it was at the new Nürburgring, sorry. Yeah, it was the new Nürburgring, but it doesn't make any difference. It was the same pits and everything, wasn't it? Of course it was. And so there was a policeman standing there in the pit lane. So Sheridan went up, sort of half jokingly, said, "Where is the Bunter house?" Meaning, where is the commentary box where Bunter, the commentator, would be commentating? And of course, the policeman thought he was talking about the post office, which I think is Bunter house in German, and directed us to the post office. Great story, Peter. Anyway, there you go. They're the stupid things that used to happen in those days. Anthony Marsh missed. I don't know how we got onto that one, but thank you, Gandalf. Electric Rides is the name of this questioner or commenter. Do you think Lando will do any deeper analysis of his driving after Austria? I think he's an excellent driver, but he's just a bit short of being able to consistently challenge Verstappen. Well, it's quite a... Yeah, I was thinking about that. I think a lot of people are going to start giving poor Lando a bit of a hard time because it's like, you know, he kept trying to pass Max and nothing seemed to work, and eventually they crashed. And I think that's being a bit tough on Lando. I think he is actually pretty good in traffic, and I think he is a very good racing driver with racing in italics, if you see what I mean. And I don't think this will have much effect on him, to be honest. And I think what will have an effect are all the people saying, oh, Max is dirty, Max is this, Max is that. I think he needs to get away from all that noise and just focus on his own preparation and his own life and his own world and just continue to be Lando Norris, and he'll be fine. If he does start to think, if he really starts to believe what Andrea Stella's saying, then it might be a problem, because he might be starting to think, you know, I'm driving to one set of rules and Max is driving to another set of rules, and that's when it's really, you know, it can really affect your performance. I hope he doesn't do that. And I'm surprised Stella's said that, actually, because it's like, I've got to defend my driver and this is terrible what Max Verstappen's doing. Well, that's not the best way to get, you know, your driver motivated, is it? You need to say, great race by both of them, ended in tears, won't happen again. Lando was brilliant, let's move on. I think all that stuff of trashing Max will start to sit in Lando's psyche if he's not careful. And if that happens, as I say, you know, you're starting to think you've got different rules, you're racing to different rules, and that's a dangerous thing for a team manager to be doing, in my opinion. Nippy Moto, the only guy on the grid that can take it to Max consistently is Lewis. Watching his onboards, I think Lewis is still driving as good as he was. The only issue is his qualifying race pace is rapid. Yeah, well, I hope some of you were watching the Saturday video I did from Austria when I pinpointed that great section of road, turns 7 and 8, the left-hander becoming the right-hander, that change of direction after that long left-hander in the midfield. And I got down to the microsectors there. And number 2 behind Max was Lewis Hamilton there. Really, really good. Just showing he still has all that finesse and touch and feel. He was something like 5 kilometres quicker than George right there. But guess what? George was quicker through the last 2 corners. George was quicker through turn 1. And George was quicker through turn 4, I think. So, you know, what does that mean? It means when it's very finessey and it's very tiptoey, Lewis is still absolutely right up there. It also means that when it's just like, you know, a right-hander and I'm going to get this corner almost perfect, I'm going to be right on the edge, it's always going to be difficult to beat George Russell, because it doesn't require, I mean, finesse. It does require finesse, but it requires commitment and judgment more than it requires finesse, those last 2 corners, as does turn 1, as does turn 4. And so, and Lewis, I think Lewis's great thing now is his finesse. He's not going to commit at the level George Russell commits on a consistent basis anymore, I don't think. And that's partly the Mercedes, you know, hangover that we're in now, where he's in this weird thing of leaving the team and he's moving on to better pastures. Partly he never wanted George in the car anyway. He wanted to keep Valtteri as his teammate. Partly a little bit of the cloud still from the World Championship. He thinks he should have won in Abu Dhabi in 21. And a lot of the world does as well, including me. And partly being a 7 times world champion is been there, done that, and knows when it's worth taking a risk and knows when it's worth being Lewis and that lovely finesse. And when, if it comes down to 0.001 of total commitment, he's going to give it to George. I think it's that. But I thought it was really impressive, and I was actually quite surprised when I got all those numbers and all that data. I wasn't surprised. I was actually very pleased to see how good Lewis was there. And that's a really good bit of road there. Really good bit of road. I've got to hand it to Austria that finally that circuit's come up with something that really works. That section of road. Well, it works with these cars on these tyres. That's why I've never really thought about it before. Okay, first of the super chats. Octay Yilmaz. Try 110. Thank you very much. I think Max lacks Senna's hard speeches. He's a very native speaker. He silenced after Silverstone 21. Also that stupid Red Bull mistake, Monza 21, USA 22, and this. But he is a guy to watch. Yeah, he doesn't talk that much, does he? And I think that's a good thing. It's the counterpoint to what I was just saying about Andrea Stella winding up the McLaren world by saying, this is the Max Verstappen that we all knew from 2021, and now look what he's doing. All that stuff. And the counterpoint to that is Max saying very little and just go, it's a motor race, been there, it's had that, move on. I'm very annoyed I didn't win that race. At least I finished 5th, and that's it. And he was probably karting or something on the Monday afterwards, having fun with his mates. And that's what makes him a very, very good racing driver. He's very simple. He's got his sim games, he's got his Formula One, and he's karting. And that's probably about it. And I love that. Total and utter commitment. Great stuff. Brilliant. And there you go. That's really messed up the exposure. So yeah, very different. Whereas Ayrton would often talk a lot. I used to talk to Ayrton for, not hours, but when he was in Formula Ford, I remember, on any given race day at Silverstone, he was in Formula Ford or Ford 2000. You'd find Ayrton after the race and ask him a question about what gear he took in COPS or whatever, and you'd have him for half an hour. Never stop talking. Difficult to get Max to talk for half an hour. Well, I did a thing with him at Sky once, and he spoke a lot until the director kept saying, enough. Another super chat. This is from Harley Rule. What can they do to stop people faking being pushed off the track? Alonso clearly did it on the weekend. I'm glad you said that and not I. I'm always a bit scared of Fernando Alonso. And Hamilton did it heaps in 21. Others do it too. The racecraft seems to be lacking a lot with some drivers. Well, absolutely. I think I should be paying you for that comment. It's brilliant. Thank you very much. You're right. Whoa, he had me off. He pushed me off. Pierre Gasly was pretty good at that one too, isn't he? With dropping old Ocon into it. Yeah, they do it all the time. It's all histrionics. It's all because of radio, and it's all because of, I don't know what it is. Blame Netflix, really, I suppose. Looks good on camera, I guess. But you're right. What was Alonso doing worrying about that? His biggest worry was that he was getting blown away into nowhere. He was nowhere. And he should have been on the radio saying, see what happens when you give me a rubbish car? I get into a battle with this guy who's just run into me. It wasn't blaming him. Who cares? The position they were in, it was nowhere. The biggest thing at Aston Martin was why they were so slow. Oops, got to have another go at this. Sorry about this. It's all getting a bit... I need to get the mechanics in to sort this one out. There we go. But speaking of Aston Martin, I noticed today, the news just in, that Andy Cowell's going to move in there he's been invited to take over, which is good, from Martin Whitmarsh and running that team. So I suspect, and bearing in mind, obviously, the 26 regs with the new power unit and how good Andy was in his days at Mercedes and before that Ilmore and Cosworth, that's a very good move for Aston Martin, I think, and quite bad news for everybody else. I was only asking somebody the other day, where was it? At Barcelona, I think. I was talking to an engineer saying, what's Andy Cowell doing these days? I'm surprised nobody's hired him. But exactly, somebody was listening, eavesdropping, and now Aston Martin have hired him. So that's a very, very good thing for Aston Martin, I think. Very good. So all the best to Andy Cowell. On another subject altogether, maybe it'll come up or not, but I'll mention it anyway. I noticed Williams are going to have a new livery or different livery on the car with the Union flag, and it's a tribute to the 1,003 employees. So there it is. It's in black and white now. 1,003 people, and they still couldn't get a spare car in the freight for the Australian Grand Prix, a spare chassis. Unbelievable, isn't it? And that's the impression you get. You go to Williams and you think, wow, this is so impressive. And they're hopeless. Well, not hopeless. They have some good qualifying sessions and occasionally get some points. But they're not where they should be, given the fact that they have 1,003 employees. More than that, because they've just announced 5 or 6 new engineers joining the team. So that's, at least 1,008 now, probably 1,010. And they still, makes me laugh actually when, Audi just announced the appointment of Audi or Sauber, one of the two, them both, announced a performance engineer. How can you have a performance engineer when you don't have any performance anyway? I just don't get it. All these titles and names and people, and the number of employees, 1,003. What would Frank Williams think about that? We were 130 when we built the 14B? Probably the most technically advanced Formula One car of all time. 130 people. Williams are now 1,003 people, and they're struggling to beat Haas Ferrari. Struggling. Well, they're not beating them. I don't know. Sarash Soman, hi Peter. Did you have a chance to look at the soapbox video where Max ended up fastest by 1 second to the next best guy? Thank you very much for asking that question. It took me a while because guess what? It's not on the Red Bull Media Hub. Annoyingly, they've only got still pictures, and to watch it you got to go onto YouTube. Nothing wrong with YouTube, except that I can't then put it on my YouTube channel because it belongs to somebody else, and it's a big rigmarole of getting permission, all that stuff. So, but yes, absolutely. And you can see Max there letting the thing run freely, getting into a straight line as much as possible, and just being absolutely square with the soapbox. It's brilliant stuff. And thank you so much for pointing that out. And it's just a reminder that Rob Wilson is absolutely correct when he says that if there's a difference in driving between Sergio Perez and Max Verstappen, it will definitely show up in a standard road car. Absolutely. In fact, it'll be magnified by a standard road car. And that is an absolute fact that I would bet 90% of all the key people in all the Formula One teams would not accept. They would all think that the only way a driver could improve his own physical driving would be in a racing car, not a road car. And they're wrong. They're completely wrong. And Rob's proved that. And the Red Bull soapbox has proved that. So anybody who thinks it's expensive, learning the craft needs to think again. It's not as... You could find... I would think, take out Max maybe, take out some of the top three, let's say. Any other Grand Prix driver, if they did a month of days with Rob Wilson, let's say, 12 days of Rob Wilson, I would be absolutely astonished if they didn't find a tenth of a second in their driving over one lap. Astonished. And think about how much money a team spends in order to find 1/10 of an aerodynamic advantage from CFD in the wind tunnel, given the restraints also of testing anyway, which makes it even more ludicrous that they don't spend the money that it would take just to go out and do a day with Rob, which isn't a lot. It's Rob's daily fee, which knowing Rob is not very much. Then it's the rental of a car, and it's not even that. I think Rob probably gets cars these days from manufacturer, I think from Ford. It's tires, set of tires, it's the track hire, and it's usually, Bedford on a Wednesday, so it's not going to break the bank. And that's it. It's nothing compared with a wind tunnel test. It's nothing compared with CFD. So why don't they do it? Oh, they don't do it. I can tell you now why. Because they're all infallible and they're all perfect. In the same way that it can't be Lando Norris's fault. It's got to be Max Verstappen's fault. If you are Andrea Stella, it cannot be anything to do with Lando. Because we've all known about Max ever since 21, and now he's showing his true colours. I mean, what is that all about? I like Andrea a lot. It's a really good bloke. But I'm astonished that he said that, to be honest. Sarosh Soman. Peter, how as a viewer can we make out if the braking is smooth and the car is stable under transition? From the onboards, all I can see is the steering inputs. Can't get a feel for throttle and brake application. Well, you're absolutely right. You can't. And it's been one of my bête noire over the years that we don't have cameras in the footwell area of Grand Prix cars, because watching the footwork is much more important than watching the handwork. A Grand Prix car is driven by the feet, not by the hands, primarily. And without the footwork, you don't have the handwork. That's why Fernando Alonso is so good. Fernando Alonso's footwork, once he's got the car, once he's got through that pretty horrendous initial handwork of boom, loading the car up, boom, loading the car up. The reason he gets away with that every lap, or most laps, apart from when he nearly went, I nearly crashed in qualifying, was it? Qualifying or FP3 or something, or sprint qualifying, I can't remember. Anyway, in Austria. Actually interesting, turn 7-8 transition, is because his footwork is so sublime. He's absolutely wonderful. And I can say that because I have seen his footwork. I was lucky to do a few laps with him once in a Renault Megane Turbo around Ricard. And I said, I want to see your footwork. I'm going to watch your feet, Fernando. And he thought it was really funny. And at the end of it, he said, so how was it? How was it? He was keen to know what, how it all went. And sure enough, it was absolutely wonderful. It was just, feet were just dancing over the pedals. Just incredible feel. While he was talking, it was just all happening purely naturally. And that's what we don't get. And we don't get it because in order to have decent footage, it needs to have a decent angle. You need to have decent lighting, and to have decent lighting, they can get the camera small enough, but it's very difficult to get the lighting right in the football area. And I have said over the years, as much as I've said get rid of DRS and various other things, I've said that I would love when the new regulations are drawn up, at any given moment when they're drawing up regulations, new regulations, that they build it in that they have to have enough space in the football area for the lighting they need to have football cameras. And they never do it. So I'm assuming they haven't done it for 27 either, 26. So that's not going to happen. But you're right. If we could see that and it was all synced up, we would see a lot more. I did try to do a video once of Valtteri Bottas in the Mercedes infield. I think it's on my channel, at Mercedes World at Brooklands. I was doing a few laps with him there in some sort of Mercedes AMG thing, and we had a camera on his feet and we had a camera on his hands, and we did try to marry them up, and I actually got Rob Wilson to voice it over, and he found a moment when Valtteri was really, really good in terms of just letting the car settle and what he was doing with the footwork and how he was coming out of the brake pedal pressure just to settle the car, which is a beautiful thing to see, and you don't see that, of course, in the onboards we have. So in answer to your question, how can a viewer look at braking? All you can do is look at the external shot. The offboard, as somebody called them the other day. And you can see quite a lot, but it's got to be from angles shot with a camera that is not moving with the car, not panning with the car. And I'm looking forward to Silverstone. Hopefully they've got that camera on the entrance to Copse, which is, I don't know what turn it is now, the old turn 1, the right-hander, very fast right-hander. And the camera, often that camera just tends to stay and they go, wow, 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 like that. And when they do that, you'll see braking. And I did a video a couple of years ago. There was some footage put out, rights-free footage put out by Red Bull when Albon was at Red Bull. And I did a video called Why Alex Albon is Better Than People Think He Is, or something like that. And it's because from that angle, they had a camera there. You could see there his transition. His braking was really good. There was no movement of the car, and you could just tell that he'd got the braking beautifully in cadence with the road and the grip of the tyres. There was nothing overloading the car, nothing sharp about his brake application. And then you could see a very seamless transition into the corner. A little bit wide, he's going on a little bit too long and making the corner a bit too long compared with Max. But in terms of the transition, it was beautiful. It's what Jarno Trulli used to be so good at, and Jean Alesi, that transition. Jacques Lafitte too. Three drivers with phenomenal transition. Better, for example, than Jenson Button's. Jensen's feel, I think, was from apex to exit. He just had great feel from apex to exit, and great traction, feel for traction. So, yeah, there we go. I was just thinking about Jenson. I think the other thing about Jenson is that it always struck me that he had really good lack of overlap between throttle and left foot braking. He wasn't a great one for doing what I just described Michael doing and using the left foot brake to set up the car a little bit, because Michael could do it without slowing down the car. He was just setting up the car. Whereas I think Jenson, quite correctly, was always wary of slowing down the car by braking against throttle. And as a result, he became one of the great drivers in terms of lack of overlap. And there was virtually nothing between throttle and brake with Jenson, but he didn't have a lot of overlap. And that's an art and a skill in itself. He compared with a lot of other drivers. I mean, Taku Sato is a good example of a driver that had a lot of brake against throttle, whereas Jenson very rarely did that. He had a great feel for the pedals. Pantro F1. Hi Peter, what do you think of the strongly biased British media reports of the incident between Max and Norris, painting Max like he's the biggest villain in Formula One? Well, absolutely ludicrous. and it's a sad indictment of the media. I guess in a way it's not a surprise. I don't want to sound in any way condescending now, or patronising even. But if the younger journalists are only able to read the very sort of vanilla down media press releases and the soundbite interviews, and they have no real opportunity to get to the heart of things, it's no surprise that they're just sort of skimming the surface of everything that's happening and not really understanding it. And so I'm just saying it's not a surprise, and not that that's an excuse, but it's just not a surprise. But yeah, it's bad, isn't it? I mean, and I think it's exemplified by the whole Andrea Stella, who's not British media, but he is the team principal, I think, of McLaren, and he's out there trashing Max Verstappen. You know, correct me if I'm wrong, but Andrea Stella was Fernando Alonso's race engineer, wasn't he, at Ferrari? It's not as if Fernando's been white and white all these years. So I just think it's very sad that they're doing that, because I'd like to know what anybody who's criticizing Max actually thinks he did badly in Austria. What did he do? I mean, his defences against Lando into turn 4, as I say, were absolutely sublime. And he was in the middle of the road of the actual shunt, minding his own business almost. So what did he do wrong? I don't get it. What he did was be a racing driver who wasn't just going to sort of let the guy pass because he's got DRS, and settle back and finish behind him. Had he done that, of course, he would have won the race because of the penalty. But that's not in Max's nature, is it? So, yeah, I just think I don't like all this polarization of Formula One. I didn't like it in 21 when it was going on between Max and Lewis, and I don't like it now. I think people should appreciate great driving. No driver's perfect. We all know that. So I don't, I don't understand why people have to polarize things so much. Just appreciate they're all very, very good drivers, and they're all part of Formula One's rich tapestry. Hackavelli, the race after the show with Jolyon Palmer and Will Buxton, where they were laughing at Alex Brundle for trying to give an explanation of the crash between Max and Lando. All they were doing is adding drama. Well, I didn't see any of that, and I'd never see that commentary or those people, so I can't comment on it at all. So all I can give is my opinion, which was that Max was in the middle of the road, and he was in the middle of the road to the point where it was going to be very difficult for Lando to go down the inside, and so Lando, with all this speed differential, went up on the outside, at which point his only chance to do anything would have been a sort of undercut thing coming out, and then try to get him in the toe into 4. But I didn't see Max doing anything incorrect there, even though he got the penalty from apparently moving a little bit to the left, so which you have to accept. And that's all it is. Would mirrors come into it? I mean, I don't know if they're talking about that, but I'm sure Max basically had a vague idea of where Lando was. But but did he? I mean, when it's that big a speed differential, dive bomb is absolutely the correct word to apply to it, because you are literally a passenger with that amount of speed differential when you're closing in on a car at that rate into very heavy braking area. So all Max could do was kind of duck almost and just go down the middle of the road, which was the place where he probably felt safest, I imagine. So I don't know. I can't answer that other stuff because I never watched that. Farzed Jockey. Well, I don't know. This is obviously chatting within yourself. It says they want a non-British driver to yield to let British drivers win. So, yeah, there's all this sort of nationalism coming into it again. Nationalism or patriotism? I think it's nationalism in this case, isn't it? And it'll all come back to bite them. And I think, then everybody who's out there criticizing Max needs to think about it a bit more. Trail Break 3 says that corner kills me in the sim. Just brake a little bit earlier. Remember the Jim Clark mantra that if you want to go quicker, don't brake later, just come out of the brakes a little bit sooner. Owly 0014 at Petrol. I agree partially, but they both had all 4 tyres, and it happens at the start. Max forced him half off the track after crashing. Quite sure what that meant, actually. So, I mean, nobody seems to be talking about why Max was on used scrubbed mediums and how that happened. To me, that was part of it. You know, what was he doing on? It's very unlike Red Bull to get it wrong, to get it so wrong, to be ending up on mediums, but they're scrubbed mediums, and Lando's on a new set. And he's just lost 4 seconds in a fluff pit stop. What was that all about? Nobody seems to be talking about that. My response to that is, everybody makes mistakes. Maybe this is a sort of mistake that is going to happen more often, not necessarily wheel nuts in pit stops, but other things as well, strategy, whatever. The more pressure is coming from the other teams. That's how pressure manifests itself. And Red Bull ultimately got it wrong because they went into that Grand Prix, I think, believing that the right race strategy for tyres was medium, hard. And Max was one of the only top runners to have 2 sets of hard tyres, new hard tyres, going into the race. Bob's your uncle. But it all went wrong when Charles Leclerc declared that the hard tyre was unraceable and very quickly went back to the medium after his first corner shunt, making everybody think they had to race the medium, apart from George Russell, who's on the hard and won the race. But that's why I think Red Bull panicked into running the medium tyre. Also because at the back end of Max's middle stint on the hard tyre, he had a lot of trouble from the 2 Haas Ferraris, and it had used the hard more than he wanted to, and they were catching him, and it was difficult for him to stay ahead with their top speed advantage and DRS, of course. And so on the back of all that, plus Lando having that new set of mediums, Red Bull thought, we better get Max out on the mediums. They're better than the new hards. And I think it was, one thing after another on that. Just going to have to raise this chair. It's so annoying, isn't it? So, yeah, anyway, nobody's mentioning that, so I am. Trail Break 3 says personality of a bowl of porridge. Sadly, I can't see the comment before that of what it's relating to, so I don't have to respond, but I guess he's talking about me, I would guess. Can't be any racing driver out there with a personality like a bowl of porridge, surely not. Chuffmeister says someone needs to tell Lando that he's not racing his friends anymore. Well, that's probably a bit of a dig at the fact that, in theory, social media, single soundbite, clickbait, childish stuff says that they're good friends. They're good mates. I mean, Max Verstappen's never going to have a really good friend who's a rival. He's too bright for that, any more than Lando will. But they're good mates. But I doubt they will be anymore. Brings me back to that thing. I've said it once before, the whole Jimmy Connors thing I really respected. And that was finding out the hotels in which your nearest rivals are all staying, and never, ever stay in the same hotel, because you don't want to see the face of the guy you're going to be playing in the Wimbledon final. You just live in your own world and you hate that guy until the final's over. And really, I think Max can do that quite well and still have a bit of a smile on his face and make people think that they're his mates. Joanna Van H says, absolutely true. Probably referring to the comment that I've got a personality like a bowl of porridge. So there you go. Watchdogs 132. Alonso needs to move to McLaren. One last dance. Well, actually, I think with Andy Cowell at Aston Martin can reasonably think now that they'll go quite well. I've got a lot of faith in Andy Cowell. He's a good man, good brain, doesn't speak too much, just gets on with it. And how he will work under the whole Stroll thing, I don't know, but he should be all right. I don't think he's bright enough not to be going there unless he felt that he had a reasonable amount of autonomy. And the other team, of course, might be Alpine. Don't you think Flav's on the phone now to his mate? Not even on the phone. Don't you think they're on the boat together, chatting about getting it back together for one last waltz? Fernando and Flav. Isn't that what it's going to happen? Pierre Gasly, Fernando Alonso. Fernando in shock. Departure from Aston Martin. Drive the team apart as he did at Ferrari to the point where he has to leave. Yeah, could easily happen. And then Carlos Sainz goes to Aston Martin instead of Fernando and wins 2 Grand Prix with Andy Cowell running the team. Dream on, Peter. Ferrari with Lewis says Watchdogs 132. Yeah, well, speaking of Ferrari and Lewis driving at Ferrari, what did we all think about Flavio Briatore's live interview on the grid, when they went up to him and said, so, obviously under the heading of, are you thinking about hiring Carlos Sainz as an Alpine driver? So what do you think about Carlos Sainz, Flavio? And he said, what I think about Carlos Sainz, I think he's a very fast racing driver, and he currently races for Ferrari, eh? That was the end of the interview. Unbelievable insight. Almology. If Lando thinks Max will show up in an interview wiping tears, he's in for a long season. Ha ha ha. Well, yeah, you're right. And Max isn't going to do that. I think, going back to the comments by Andrea Stella, I think he's just made it a bit worse for him in terms of Max's approach to everything at McLaren as well. I don't think he's helping by saying that. What does he think? What does Andrea think is going to happen? Does he think that the FIA are going to say, Stella's right, we need to give massive penalty to Max Verstappen for what happened in Austria and give the win retrospectively to Lando Norris? I mean, I don't know what he's thinking to achieve by saying stuff like that. Anyway. Haidarusha says people just want to see Max getting past, and when he refuses, Max is the worst driver on the grid. Hilarious. Yeah, well, it's a little bit like that. I think you've got to throw in the lunacy of the sporting regulations and the inability for them to be correctly enforced. I say lunacy because they are so weighted towards the driver on the outside now. It is pitiful. And as I've said in a couple of interviews, and I think I said it on Sunday night, that if you are approaching a corner and you're on the inside, it's your corner. There's the news, okay? It's your corner. And the guy on the outside is putting his life in his own hands if he wants to stay with you. The rules have now been written that if you're on the inside and there's somebody silly enough to try to pass you on the outside, you have to give him lots of room. And, he might be on the marbles, so you have to give him even extra room. And if you move the steering 1 inch coming out of the corner because you've had a bit of a slide, you're going to be in trouble. It's pathetic. I mean, how can the drivers or the team owners, whoever it is who approved that rule, how could they have done that? And, that's where it all went wrong. Add DRS to all that lunacy and you've got the situation we're in. Aaron Smith. Do you feel drivers should be banned from reporting other drivers' track limits? In football, if you ask for another player to be booked, you'll get booked yourself. Well, in a way I do. It's a bit like a driver phoning up the team owner of another team and trashing that driver to the team owner on a Wednesday night. It's just, you just don't do that. And you don't do that in any sport, I don't think. And I come back to my thing. I think that the FIA / Liberty have missed a massive trick in not making track limits, which is part of the safety of modern Formula One. We now have a lot of runoff area, and so track limits are a much bigger deal than they ever were. And that's a good thing, but they've missed a trick in not making it part of the TV show. And we should have proper electronic sensors, and we should have photo cells under the sensors that tell us if a driver's gone over the track limit in real time, and a red light should come up in the corner of the screen saying, Hulkenberg, track limit, turn 5. And if you go to that, you should see the tyre just going over the thing and igniting the red light. Wouldn't that be good TV? Lando, you just had 3 warnings, you've had 3 track limits, any more you're going to be in trouble. Everyone will be on tenterhooks at that point, watching this little box to see every corner whether Lando's going to make the light red. And he did. And it wasn't out there for anybody to savour as part of the Formula One show. And nobody knew about it, especially Red Bull. And that's, it cannot be that expensive and that difficult to do that. If you think of the money that Liberty are throwing at Formula One at races like Vegas and Miami and underwriting other races, the cost of doing that on a couple of corners on, say, 6 tracks out of the whole calendar, it's not a massive thing. Do it. But they won't. Surf South says Alonso could be almost washed. IMO. I'm not sure what IMO means. I should know. Probably some mega street speak that Windsor's oblivious to. But I think you're trying to say washed up. It's very disappointing, isn't it? And it's all under this sort of whole Ralf Schumacher thing of, we're going as well as we expected. We never thought we'd be good here. I mean, you don't expect to hear that stuff coming out of Fernando Alonso's voice. I mean, he's the driver that can drive a car on 3 wheels and 1 front wing and, half a turbo blown away and still bring the car home in the podium. And that's not what we want to hear from Fernando Alonso. And he's getting blown away by Lance Stroll a little bit now as well, which is a bit worrying, isn't it? You know, 1 minute, the start of the year, the Aston Martin's in a great car and Fernando's podium and this and that. And what's the great, charming Fernando? And the next minute, it's just like, what is this guy doing? I think it's a super chat, another one. I'm not quite sure. Let's have a look. Yes. Okay, Otke Yilmaz. Peter, do you think Max will leave Formula One in 2028? After 2006 Michael retirement, I can't bear it. Thanks. 2028? I don't know. I can't think that far ahead. What is 2028? It's 2 years after the new regulations. No, I think he's... If Max is going to do anything, the logical thing, as I said before, would be for him to race next year for Red Bull and then take a year off to see what the world's all about in 2026. Who's got a decent car, who hasn't? And then whoever's got the best car, go and drive for that team in 27 on the basis that he's Max Verstappen. And regardless of what drivers that team may have under contract, for sure they're going to pay to have Max and buy the other guy, the incumbents, out. That if he's going to get out and take a rest, that would be the time to do it at the end of 25, just to watch, because nobody really knows, do they? Ferrari could be unbelievably quick car in 26, blow everybody away. Charles Leclerc's world champion. Lewis Hamilton's not had a great year for whatever reason. If Ferrari then say to Max, we want you to replace Lewis, we're going to buy him out of his contract, Max is going to do that, isn't he? I suspect. He'll want to keep his options open to do that, I think. I'm not saying that's what will happen, but you're asking if he took a year off or if he took some time off, when would it be? That's my response. That would be the logical time to do it. So we got a bit of a racist comment here. I'm not going to put it up, but please refrain from those. Totally unnecessary. And if people want to know why I don't reply very much on Twitter, now X, it's because during the Rosberg-Hamilton era, I was subjected to a lot of racial abuse or racial whatever it was. By racists, I was subjected to quite a lot of abuse. And so I just thought, right then, I'm not going to get involved in comments on Twitter anymore. And I put stuff on Twitter because it's still, I think, a reasonably valid platform for nice photographs of four-leaf clovers. But to me, it's not a place to interact with people. Okay, here's another super chat. Thank you very much, Aaron Smith. Do you feel George is being underrated by fans? Not by me. I don't know about the fans. I've always thought he was super quick. I mean, that's why, if you look at my channel, I've got lots of interviews with George when he was in GP3 and F2, and always been a massive fan. I've done a few live events with him as well. Incredibly fast racing driver. Anybody who didn't think that, even from his GP3 days, let alone today, doesn't know what they're looking at. And that's obviously the reason that Lewis never wanted him in that car instead of Valtteri, which is, I understand it from Lewis's standpoint. And I kind of always thought it was a bit strange that Mercedes took the decision they did, because George is that quick. And do you really want to unsettle Lewis Hamilton that much by having a driver that quick in the other car, in a way that you would never put somebody that quick alongside Max Verstappen, for example? But in terms of your question, I don't know. I can't imagine by the fans. I imagine he's going to go to Silverstone as the new hero of the fans, is he not? I imagine he and Lando pretty evenly split between the two, I would guess. Lucas Noxio, he's replying to @Sunitso. You one of those DTS fans, you should look at Schumacher and Senna races if you want to see aggressive driving. Max is aggressive, but not as much as they. Well, that's true. I mean, you think about what Michael used to do particularly, and also Senna, yeah, for sure. Max is an absolute pussycat compared with those two. But that's, you know, that's just the world in which we live today. A lot of people are just haven't known anything different from this era, and so they're judging it by what they see on the track and what they're seeing in print and what they're hearing on the radio, I guess. And when Andrea Stella says, now we're seeing the Max Verstappen that the whole world knew back in 21, then I guess a lot of people who are McLaren fans are going to think that Max is the evil poison that needs to be beaten. It's very sad. I don't think we should be doing that. So Sunitzo says, that's the problem. Max is not honest. He couldn't apologise to Lando. He couldn't admit his mistake. Instead, he made excuses. He's only a top performer when he's 30 seconds in front in a rocket ship. Well, that's not true. I'm sorry, that isn't true. Look at the number of passes he's done. I mean, that pass in the sprint race repass in the sprint race was perfect as well. He's brilliant in defence, and as we've seen, and defence is just as important as attack. And if he didn't think he did anything wrong, why does he need to apologise to Lando when Lando's driven into the back of the Red Bull and punctured the left rear tyre? That's to put it from Max's perspective. I'm not saying that's my objective comment. Don't quote me out of context. But from Max's perspective, that's what happened. So why would he apologise? He's probably waiting for Lando to apologise. Basically, if you get run into from the car behind, it's not your fault. It's on the road and on the racetrack. Okay, let's have a look. Another super chat. But I need to just get rid of this to read it properly. Hi Peter, do you think McLaren will do what Mercedes did in 21 and turn the British media into a weapon against Max? I think they will, but I don't think they're doing it intentionally. And I think, as I just said, I think Andrea Stella should have thought a little bit more before he had made the comments public that he's just made, because I don't think it helps Lando. I think it puts Lando in a position, it puts him in a world of thinking that Lando, is perfect and did everything correctly, and Max did not. And therefore, because Max didn't get any sort of penalty for the other moves, that it's unfair. And I think that's a bad way to be nursing your driver along in a long season. I don't agree with that. So, and I think another thing here. Yeah, another super chat. Sorry, I'm just going to have to bring back my correct page. Here we go. No, incorrect page. Sorry. What have I done here? Anyway. Sorry, a bit of a hiatus here while I get my act together again as to where I am on this feed. I've got that there. Okay, I need to minimize that. This is all because, again, the chat that I'm looking at has jammed, which is a little bit annoying. But we'll soon solve this problem, don't worry. Here we are. Here we go. It's solved straight away. Another super chat. Thank you very much, Haibu. Great as always, Peter. Love your live chats. On a slightly different topic, do you think refueling will ever be reinstituted? It would open up a lot of strategy options and interesting racing. I don't know. I think part of the problem is that Formula One doesn't want to be seen to be using a lot of fuel these days, as little as possible, I think. And if it is fuel, it's not. And on top of that, I don't think they'd ever want to have any of the safety issues we had with refueling before. Bear in mind the fuel goes in under very high pressure, and it was always a difficult problem having exactly the same fuel rigs and fuel pumps on every garage for every team. They were FIA distributed for obvious reasons. Nothing was ever equal. So I think for those two reasons, I don't think it's ever going to happen again. I think we've seen refueling, and I don't think it's ever going to come back. So there, that was the. I'm just trying to see if there's any other super chats. Don't think so. Just looking there. So let's have a look back through our chat again, our main chat. Richard VANV. Hi, it makes me sad that a lot of professional drivers like to hammer on someone to make him look bad. Seems to me they already have a bad opinion about someone and they're just waiting to trash. Yeah, I mean, one athlete to another. You get outbursts in other sports, don't you? But I think this thing in Formula One, it's always magnified by the team, isn't it? And right now, I think the team are saying, the McLaren team are saying more than Lando himself is saying. And Lando's trying to get back into his zone of being Lando Norris, going to the British Grand Prix, trying to win the race. And if he doesn't have any issues, and if he has a clear racetrack and wins the race, he'll be fine. But if he's racing with Max again, it's going to be something on his mind, I think. And I think that's why it's a mistake to be doing this. And Max is not the sort of driver that will be affected by any of this. He'll just be clean sheet of paper, going into the British Grand Prix to win the race at all costs. I say at all costs. Putting aside all extraneous events is what I mean, and just focusing 100% on the win. Not at all costs, obviously, I don't mean that. Yup, Tendik says, it's not that big a deal. Emotional Norris fans act like they just witnessed murder. Well, I think he's right. I think all this emotion, all this chat, and it's the fans and it's the McLaren team. It's not Zach Brown, I don't think, interestingly. So full marks to Zach. I think Zach is a racer too. I mean, he's a pretty fast racing driver in his own mind. I think any racer would be thinking, what are they on about? And as I keep saying, what is this Max Verstappen of 2021 that everybody, well, certainly Andre Steller's talking about? Is he talking about, I presume he's talking about Jeddah, but we all know what that was about. Max was leading the championship and Lewis was his arch rival, and very poorly he went along with the idea of, if they both went out of the race, it wouldn't be too bad for him. And I gave him a massive amount of criticism for that. But the rest of 21? Anyway. Couple of things, but nothing out of the ordinary. JP Eagles and Cats. Palmer and Buxton are a joke. Well, as I say, I don't see them or talk. I don't see anything, the stuff they do on TV, so I can't really comment about that. But I don't think we should be that nasty about people out there trying to do their best and give their commentary or whatever, their opinion, I guess, are they? I'm sure lots of people say that about Windsor. Who is this Windsor? What's he on about? T3 HGIR. Is it true that Silverstone layout was changed because of the Pedro Lamy testing accident in '94? I think it was. Yeah, Jarno Trulli, I think, had a big one too, didn't he, on that right-hander in the Renault, the Benetton Renault. So yeah, I think it was after that they. I think they also wanted to extend the circuit and have more slow corners and all that stuff, and it was all part of the Bernie thing of. Silverstone needs to offer more opportunity for the sponsors, the trackside advertising, and they used to have a new pit complex and everything else. I think it was kind of thrown in a little bit to the whole Bernie thing, but also, yeah, I mean, it was a wonderful corner, that right-hander, wasn't it? Unbelievably quick right-hander under the bridge there. I used to watch there every year. It was so quick. And there wasn't a lot of places to go if things went wrong. But yeah, it was worth remembering that, huge shunt. Luckily, Pedro got away with it, but it was a big one. Yay Ocean. Later, if Lando still treasures Max as a friend, and when he looks back at what's the media doing to his friend, quite sure. I mean, all this business of friendship and how far, as I said earlier, I think Mike Hawthorne and Peter Collins were true friends, and I think Mike would have gone into bat for Peter on anything and vice versa. Interesting to note that Sterling Moss went into bat for Mike Hawthorne as well in the 58 Portuguese Grand Prix at Oporto when Hawthorne was disqualified for when he stopped, he ran out of road, went down the escape road, got out of the car, pushed it back, and got outside assistance from the marshals to restart it, and was disqualified for the outside assistance. And Sterling went into bat for Hawthorne after the race to say, oh no, the car was just being pushed into a safer place. You can't penalise him for that, old boy. I mean, if he left the car there, it would have been far too dangerous. The marshals did exactly the right thing. He should have his point for sixth place. And guess what? Sterling then lost the championship by 1 point. And that's real friendship. It's respect of one Grand Prix driver for another, one professional for another. And we don't have much of that today, and that's for sure. But if you want to talk about things away from the track and being true friends, I mean, we always I've never asked Lewis about this, but he was supposedly very good friends with Adrian Sutil from Formula 3. And yet when Adrian got into personal problems with that glass throwing incident in China, was it? Or Malaysia? China, I think. I don't remember I don't remember Lewis going into bat for him, really. So, but you can't criticize Lewis. I have no idea about the circumstances. I can't comment on that, and I shouldn't, nor should anybody else talk about judging real friendships, because none of us are privy to actual reality, and judging people from outside is always something not to be discouraged. 4272005. The thing is, you have to run 2 different compounds. So rubbish or not, you would have to run the hard tyre anyway. I think it's probably in response to somebody else. Yeah, we kind of know that. And they'd run the medium and the hard. The question was always what they were going to do in the 3rd stint. And as I say, Red Bull went into that race quite clearly thinking they were going to run 2 sets of hard tyres, which was on the Pirelli strategy of how to win this Grand Prix, 2 new sets of hard. But they didn't have a new set of mediums, and they changed their mind and ran the scrub mediums, which a big lock-up into turn 4 on the outlap lost him a lot of time as well, lost Max a lot of time as well, which is how Lando was so near, plus the fudge pit stop. Danny London says, hi, Peter. Hi, Danny. Just going to try and release the chat a bit more. So 3:30 here in Central European time. Got about another half hour to go. That's good. Jim Hendricks. Hi, Jimmy. And if Max didn't anticipate on Lando's degenerate dive bombs, they would have crashed a few laps earlier. Why? Only Max needs to take avoiding actions, but Lando doesn't. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? It's quite a lot of comment here, which seems to be pro-Max in that it's not necessarily pro-Lando. It's interesting, isn't it? I mean, I don't want to give Lando a hard time either, because I'm not sure he did anything wrong. He was just a victim of all that ridiculous DRS. If there'd been no DRS, I think he had the quicker car, and I think his would have been much better, because Lando's very good in traffic. He would have had much more creative ways of trying to get past Max. But because of the great DRS thing, which everybody wanted, it was all a mess. Leon Ong. Hi, Peter. If car and driver were to be placed as percentage, how much would a driver's input be? Well, it's always been a good question, Leon. Always. And this was put to Enzo Ferrari, who's probably as good as anyone in the planet Earth to have answered it. And he said, when a car crosses the line to win a Grand Prix, he would apportion it 60% car, 40% driver. However, of course, there's a lot more to it than that, because the great drivers can make an average car a lot better in a much shorter time than the average drivers, because they're looking to improve different things. They know what they can do. They know what shortcomings they can overcome with their driving, and they know what shortcomings the engineers need to work on. And furthermore, they're not going to choose a shortcoming that is impracticable. So it's all going to be done in a logical way. So that's why Jackie Stewart, Niki Lauda, Michael Schumacher, to name but 3, when they were kind of in a position to be almost running their own teams, had great results. And it was because they knew exactly what was doable and what wasn't, what they could bring to the table and what the engineers could bring to the table. Whereas a lot of lesser drivers want most of the problems to be solved by the engineers on the basis that they are the racing driver and they're very fast, and if they're not quick, it must be the car. And so that's why I say a great driver can make an average car a lot better. So it isn't as simple as 60-40, but on the final lap of the race, when the job is about to be done and the checkered flag is waved, I would say it's that. It's a mechanical sport. Every team has to design and build its own car, even to enter the World Championship. Every team employs 1,000 people plus to do that, and some of them a lot more because they build their own engines as well. And because of that, it's a mechanical sport, and it's never going to be as competitive in terms of overtakes as a sport where everybody's basically in the same car, which is most other forms of motorsport, but not rallying impressively. good win for Toyota along the way in Poland. Felt very bad for Sebastian Ogier though. He had this road accident during the recce beforehand, just a few days before the rally, and it looks like it was some sort of head-on with a Ford Mondeo estate. And they were both going quite slowly. Well, certainly Ogier was going well within the I think it's 80 kilometers an hour on the recce's, something like that on that bit of road. Anyway, he was well under it, and he got hit by this Mondeo, and it was enough for him to be with a neck brace taken to hospital, and he's okay, but he couldn't do the rally. But his replacement went in, Rovanperä went in and won the race, won the rally. Brilliant. Great win for Toyota. Felt sorry for Terry Neuville because it's a very odd thing. He's leading the championship, and as a result of which, he is the first on the road. And on the Friday, at least, the road being first on the road was massive disadvantage. It's probably worth about it was probably an excess time of at least 20-30 seconds because the road was so slippery, and after about the second or third car there was a lot more grip, but because he was leading the championship he had this massive penalty and he finished fourth overall. Seems an odd wrinkle in the whole WRC regulations. I suppose they've done it just to keep things close, and it's a bit like DRS, isn't it? A bit stupid. So that was that, but it reminded me actually of that Ogier thing, reminded me of the London-Sydney Marathon, in which I was actually an official, would you believe, right at the end. I was just a kid at school, but I got a job through the Australian Automobile Racing Club, who were organising the finish of the rally at Warwick Farm. I got a job delivering the post, the mail, to all the teams. And all this mail had logged up in the office. A lot of people, all the drivers and navigators, a lot of the team people, correspond. There were no mobile phones. Everything was obviously very different in those days. And there were a lot of letters. Each team probably had about 5 or 6 letters addressed to the drivers. Not fan mail, but just letters from family or friends or whatever. And my job was to distribute all this mail. It was a brilliant thing. All the cars were all lined up on the Hume Straight there, and I was going down from car to car. Oh, where's Roger Clark? Oh, Roger, here's some mail for you. Things like this. Anyway, reminded me of those terrible last hours before the finish of that London-Sydney Marathon when Lucien Bianchi, I've got to get this right, I think he's the grand uncle of Jules Bianchi. I think he was the grand uncle. Anyway, the Bianchi family, all great race drivers. There was Mauro and Lucien, who were brothers, very, very quick, both of them. And then, of course, Jules Bianchi. Amazing, that family. But Lucien was good and finished 4th, I think, in the Spanish Grand Prix 68, that'd be right. Cooper BRM, but not slow in a number of cars. Very good in sports cars, pretty good in Formula One, quick driver. Anyway, he had this rally sewn up, the London-Sydney. He was in a Citroën, and he'd driven amazingly well, considering rallying he'd done a lot of it. He'd done the sort of tour of Europe and all that stuff, but he wasn't a professional rally driver like a lot of the guys out there he was beating. And on the last, it wasn't even the last stage, it was the last section from the last stage to Warwick Farm racetrack near Liverpool. He was asleep in the co-driver's seat, and the co-driver was driving, no problem at all, and a truck hit them on the wrong side of the road, hit them head on, and they both survived, but Lucien was very, very badly injured. Took him a long time to recover. And the victory went to Andrew Cowan famously in the Hillman Hunter. But I was so looking forward to seeing Lucien Bianchi, Formula One driver, and I couldn't believe when he didn't turn up. And he had this ridiculous accident, similar to the accident of Sebastian Ogier in the build-up to Portugal. Anyway, there's a lot of Formula One stuff for you. Okay. Al Rizea Sabaga. What happened to replying to cues chronologically? Oh, I am. Sorry about that. If you think I'm not, I've obviously made a mistake error, because what's happening is that the thing freezes and then I just go back to the top again and I'm doing everything chronologically. Sorry about that. Ali Reza. It's not a deliberate thing at all. But anyway, well, that's all I can say. Asit Kotian. People were praising him for his calm comments and using those same comments to attack Max. So yes, he got what he wanted. It's all a bit, that's chat in between. I'm a bit lost my train, your train there, what you're doing things. Akwasi Frimpong. Hi Peter, what do you think is happening to Ferrari? They've had a drop in performance. Yeah, good question. Very good question. Thank you for that. I don't know really. They seem to have done a very similar job to McLaren over the winter, in that they looked at their issues from 2023, which were a bit too quick on the straight, so we can afford to lose a bit of top speed, but we definitely need more downforce to give us a bigger sweet spot in terms of grip and balance around which we can manage the tyres better. And I think they did that quite well. McLaren did a similar thing, but much better. They weren't as quick on the straight as Ferrari in 23, so they had to work on other things, but McLaren did obviously a very good job in giving themselves a bigger sweet spot. Ferrari, I think, went too far. They obviously given themselves a lot of grip, which shows itself on slow corners and medium speed, but they have no high speed balance now, and I think that's the problem. And they're still trying to find that balance between the amount of downforce they should run to be competitive enough on the straight. They were still pretty quick in the straight line in Austria, which would suggest that they still haven't got that balance yet. We'll see even more at Silverstone how they are, because if Leclerc and Sainz are not quick around Silverstone, then we know they've got a real problem in terms of medium speed, high speed corners. At this point, I can't imagine the Ferrari is going to be brilliant through Beckett's, for example. I can see it being pretty good through Luffield, those slow corners leading onto the old back pit straight. But I can't imagine high speed change of direction. They're going to be brilliant, but we'll see. I mean, maybe they've done some stuff. But part of the problem is that historically Ferrari, like Mercedes and some other big teams, have been pretty good at responding to what other teams are doing and testing and building new cars. And they can't do any of that now with the new regulations, no testing, cost cap. And so they kind of have to live with what they've got. And if they've taken a few wrong turnings, they've got to live with that. There's not much they can do at all, really. It's just tiny things. And that's one of the worst things about this current regulation, I think. Jelmer van der Leyen. British pundits think they own Max, like we now have accepted him as a friendly driver. Never like 2021 again. Bless him. Yeah, well. Be interesting to see what happens in the Dutch Grand Prix, isn't it? What sort of... Imagine if Lando is catching Max in the last 10 laps of the Dutch Grand Prix and takes him out at Tarzan hairpin, wins the race. That's going to be interesting on the podium. All this stuff they're building up. I know there are going to be a lot of people out there, probably a lot of them attached to Liberty, saying, this is great for Formula One. Everybody's talking about it. Massive thing. I'm just a purist, I don't like all that slagging off all the time, unnecessarily so. And I don't like all that polarization stuff, because he's from this country, we've got to like him. I try to be objective about drivers, regardless of where they come from or their backgrounds. So, Hi Darusi says, these times are so weird for me. People forget what Senna and Schumacher did to win races. But now with social media and the new generation and DRS, Max gets piled on for everything he does wrong. Yeah, he's right. I think we've made that point, and I think, thank you for doing it again. Ghost Driver 87, can Piastri beat Lando over a Grand Prix distance? Yeah, I mean, he's getting near it, isn't he? He was pretty good in Austria, having had 4 or 5 bad races. He was pretty good, and sorry, I was just reading through a super chat there as I spoke. And we've done that one. So, and I think it'll be really interesting now to see how Oscar goes in Silverstone, because in theory there are some corners there that will really suit him. No, suit is the wrong word. I think he might be able to eke out an advantage over Lando in terms of tyre wear or maybe pace. Let me think where that would be. I think coming onto the old pit straight, that long right-hander, I think he'll be pretty good there. Copse, I think he'll be good. And I think he'll be better at Beckett's. Not to say Lando won't be good there, but I think over a race distance, I think Oscar might use a little bit less road. He'll have shorter corners than the corners I've described, and I think that will add up to slightly less load on the left front and the left rear, which take all the load at Silverstone, obviously. And I think he could go pretty well there. So we'll see. Sinitsa. Russell won't win a world championship unless he's in a rocket ship and has a slow teammate like Max does now and has had for the last few years. Really? I think Russell's kind of oblivious to the teammate. He's that sort of driver. I think if Russell wins a world championship or two, I think like every other world champion, he'd be quite like to have a Sergio Perez in the other car. But right now, I don't think George minds who he has in the other car. I still think he sees it as an opportunity to beat them and show that he's quicker. And that's a sign of a young, hard, tough, very fast racing driver. And I think that's what he is. And he won't win a world championship unless he's in a rocket ship. Well, who is going to win a world championship over, say, 24 races unless you're in the best car? I don't think it's a possibility now to win the world championship unless you're in the best car. You can win Grand Prix, but if you've got the best car over a season, it's almost, impossible not to win the championship. It's a long, long season. Shorter the season, the more chance that somebody's, that's a good point, isn't it? Because if the championship was only 12 races long, Ferrari probably would have a lot more chance. But because it's so long, inevitably Red Bull are going to have a pretty good car for most of those races. Pretty good, not necessarily the best car. And it kind of makes it more difficult the longer the championship. But yeah, I think if Mercedes have a race-winning car, potentially, not potentially, for sure George can be world champion. There's no doubt he's got the talent to do that, in my opinion. Brendan McCallion feels like 21 all over again after one incident. The toxicity, there you go, got it right, is off the charts. Yeah, shame, isn't it? Don't like all this toxicity. That's the right word for it, probably, isn't it? I don't like it. I call it polarization, but I think toxicity is a better word, if I could say it correctly. Bosk112 says, refueling was nice. It should be back for sure. It's a weight matter. Really? I was never a fan of refueling. I'm surprised a number of you liked it. What was the good thing about refueling? Did it make pit stops longer and therefore there was more chance of an error? Well, all they need to do in that case is reduce the number of personnel allowed to change the wheels. Wouldn't that help things along? So everybody has 8-second pit stops instead of 3-second pit stops, and there's more chance of error, and it makes the whole thing a bit more open, a bit like an F2 pit stop thing. I asked Frank Williams that once. I said, Frank, we need to get rid of these 3-second pit stops and go back to 8-second pit stops with fewer personnel. A, it'll be safer, and B, it'll have more variables. He said, absolute rubbish. The reason people watch Formula One is because of the 3-second pit stops. That's the hallmark. That's the DNA, the trademark of Formula One. People want to see that. That's what makes us different from IndyCar. We can't get rid of it. I couldn't really respond to that. I think he had a good argument, actually. Frozen ragu. Yeah. I hope it's heated up at some point. Can we just get behind sustainable fuels everywhere and save the car and motor racing and fun for the Green Brigade? Yeah, and save the car and motor racing and fun from the Green Brigade. Well, I don't think we can do that anymore. I mean, you look at all the hot hatches that are now not available anymore to buy because they're terrible for the environment. But Donald Trump is saying that there's no such thing as global warming. It doesn't exist. So what's it all about? Eddie English. I think that's going to be seeing the real Lando soon. See if he's able to stand the pressure of being a champion or not. I've got a lot of faith in young Lando. I think eyeball to eyeball, Max Verstappen versus Lando Norris. Max has got the road dust, hasn't he? But I don't think you should underestimate. I think you underestimate Lando Norris at your peril. I think he's pretty good. But I don't think, as I keep saying, I'm not sure that all this stuff that McLaren are now putting out is necessarily going to be beneficial for him mentally. Because everyone's trying to, everyone who's a friend of Lando wants to be a friend of Lando, and oh yeah, Max is terrible, done this, done that, and he doesn't need that. He just needs to be a racing driver and get on with it. Put Austria behind him, focus on Silverstone, and it's very wrong, I think, to be carrying on about it all. Sujith says, this is why Formula One needs Ferrari to be quick. Charles would have done a better job passing Max in that situation. He would call Max's defence as hard racing. Yeah, and let's go back to that famous F2 race at Abu Dhabi between Charles and Alex Albon. How many times did Charles hit Albon between that corner leading onto the back straight and coming out of that corner after the back straight? Probably about 4 times, I think. No penalty. Charles Leclerc got on with it. Yeah, absolutely right. But I mean, fairness, I think Lando said what you would expect him to say, which is, well, Max got the penalty. I'm really annoyed. I mean, I could have won that race or whatever he said. But I don't think we'd be saying as much if everybody else hadn't got on the bandwagon then and started banging on about it all. And as you correctly say, if Charles was there, it would have been a different story probably. So why wasn't Charles there? I mean, what was Charles been doing? The last couple of races, I mean, ever since Monaco, it's been like, and there've been silly things going on as well. Stuff going on with the team and radio stuff and what's going on. We'll tell you about it when you get back in, Charles. And it's all very odd, isn't it? That it's not just going ahead smoothly as it should. Even though the Ferrari itself has not been very good. Canada, good example. Spain, pretty mediocre. But it wasn't a bad car here in Austria. And it was probably not quite as good a Merc. I think the result was probably a fair result. But Charles, what happened? He went off, didn't he? Yeah, he went off in qualified 10th, and then he had a massive drama in the opening lap of the race, as you would if you're in the middle of the pack. Ridiculous. Come on, Charles. We need you. You can do the job, man. America's Choice says, yeah, Moss gave the championship to Hawthorn. He did. And that's, and people say, oh, well, in those days, that's what happened in there. What's nothing to do with those days? It was Sterling Moss and his sporting ethics. Nothing more, nothing less. People wanted to win just as much then as they do today. And sure, when people said to Sterling, well, you never won the World Championship, of course Sterling would say, well, I won a lot of races. Championship doesn't mean that much to me. Of course he's going to say that because he's Sterling Moss. But believe me, Sterling would have loved to have won the World Championship. But he was a great sportsman. Just as Peter Collins was. I mean, that question about Peter was 58. But think about what Peter did in 56 when he was driving for Ferrari. And he basically gave his car to Fangio to enable Fangio to win the World Championship at Monza when Peter, was still in the running to win the World Championship. And when asked later, he said, well, it would have been unthinkable if Fangio hadn't won the championship. That's how much respect there was. It's a bit of sort of anti-Buxton, anti-commentators. Again, because I don't listen to these guys, I'm not going to put that question up because I don't like being negative about people. I don't think it's pointless. And that's why I'm kind of saying, I don't know why Andrea Stella's saying that about Max. It's, not it's unnecessary, I think. Scott Meredith, these guys claiming Max was too dangerous and ignoring the massive shunt Lewis pulled off to take a race win. Amazing. Ignoring the massive shunt Lewis pulled off to take a race win. Yeah, well, talking about Silverstone, yeah. Well, so, yeah, although on that occasion I came down pretty much on the side of Lewis because there was a gap and Max shouldn't have left that gap. But again, it's kind of underlining what I've been saying when Stella says this is the Max Verstappen we all knew in 21 and now it's become obvious to the whole world. What is this Max in 21, that he's talking about? He's talking about the Jeddah one, in which case that was a one-off, really. Not a one-off, but it was that towards the end of the year, you could just hear Marco and those guys saying to him, look, there's not a lot of downside if you're both out of the race. Pieter van Breda, Oscar was dropped 4 places for going over once, so going over 4 times, 16 places, just fair. Yeah. Well, again, I find that whole business of track limits so irritating because it could be done in such a way that was enjoyable for the public and part of the show, and I just wish it was. Okay, Kevin says, Peter doesn't have a clue. He misrepresents the fact of Max driving from Max onboard. Quite sure what that means. You're probably saying I'm not correct in saying that Max didn't move the steering. Well, I would say, are you correct in your perspective of the corner and how that corner opens up? Because if you want to see if a driver moves, you've got to look at the steering. Sorry, mate. That's a fact of life. Another super chat Formula One, this is from Gixa Squid, thank you. Formula One seems more competitive at the end of each FIA regulation era. Why reset when it's always more enjoyable to watch after all the teams catch up? Yeah, well, the same could be said for V10s and V8s, couldn't it? You know, we got those engines super reliable, super cheap, 12 million euros for a year package by the end of it. And what do? They went to hybrids and trebled the cost of the power units and went into a year of unreliability. And that happens all the time. Why change? Don't break. Don't change something that isn't broken. But Formula One loves to do that. Got to move on. Got to change. Got to do this. Got to do that. So yeah, I wish. In a way, you're right. But what you're saying is, let's just keep the racing as it is because it's really close. But let's not take into account the new world and the new horizons out there, which come under the heading of electrification or perhaps even hydrogen in the future. Who knows? And active aero and all this stuff, and Formula One has to be seen to be moving forward all the time. Okay, the elf, Peter, yeah, but DRS is not new. No one can blame it on that. I'm not blaming the specific incident because it's the same for everybody. All I'm saying is get rid of it because it's obviously not working and it's just making the overtaking maneuvers and defense ridiculous. That's what I'm saying. And I'm allowed to say that because I've been saying from the start, we shouldn't have DRS. I've never liked DRS. And maybe I'm the only journalist in the world or the only person in the world that's been saying it. But ever since it was introduced, I've said this is a bad thing for Formula One. Uniquely. And now I'm saying it again. So I'm sorry, the elf. I am allowed to say that. And the fact that it isn't new doesn't justify its existence at all. It's like saying speed bumps are a good thing. We've had them for a long time, so we must accept them. I still think speed bumps are crazy. But that's me. America's choice. Moss and Senna, for example, could make a mediocre car good. Yeah, we're talking about the 60-40 thing there. Moss and Senna, very good example. Jim Clark, another. Nigel Mansell, another. Michael Schumacher, Niki Lauda. You know, all the great drivers could. Jackie Stewart. They all could because they knew they were discerning in what they needed to focus on. Max Verstappen, for sure, could make a pretty average car look very good in a very short space of time. Addy Boy, these Lando and Max parasocial fans are insufferable. Well, that's why we don't spend too much time on social media, isn't it? Time to walk Dexter. Octay Yilmaz, Max will be champion, guys, so relax. DH, 1.5 hour of yapping. Man has stamina. Is that me yapping? Am I yapping? Yeah, probably. Oh, it's another super chat there, I think. Samuel Sanchez, I think this is a compliment. He says, Samuel Sanchez says, Peter Windsor is the granddad I wish I had. Well, there you go. Old enough to be a great granddad, probably, but still the dad to Jack, and we have a lot of fun together now. So just checking another super chat there as I'm going back, scrolling back to the top of the chat. Carbonara says, in my opinion, Lando is too much in a hurry. Oh, maybe. I don't think so. I think he's got this lovely rhythm in which he gets, I mean, I'm talking about when he's not in traffic, obviously, but he does get into this lovely rhythm and he doesn't tend to rush anything. It all happens in its own time in a beautiful, fluid way. And that's the hallmark, I think, of Lando's driving. Long corners, wrong-ish corners, not as long as Carlos, but not as short as Oscar Piastri. And I still maintain he's pretty good in traffic. I don't think he's got any problems there other than that people are winding him up about it now, and that might come into his psyche. John Brown says, it's a fairly sweeping statement, John. Max crashes into anyone who challenges him. Yes, well, I think there'll be plenty of people to challenge that comment, but anyway, thank you for making it. The tab, if the Lando track limit penalty had come quicker, you think they would have still crashed? No, of course not. Max would have waved him past and Lando would have breezed past and then Max would have stuck in his DRS toe and won the race. Simple. This is another super chat. Octay Yilmaz. Peter, why you read that? The smile. Thanks for your kindly approach. They love their drivers and I love also. Well, it's nice. Lots of love there anyway. That's good. Thank you. DH. Love the track action, hate the off-track whining. So let's have a look. Leon Ong says, thanks for the response, Peter. Was really insightful. Thank you very much. Glad it was. Let's have a look at this one. What's this one? Rue at Scott Meredith. He's talking to Scott Meredith. You word it perfectly. Don't understand how people are so blind. You just have to look at Max Sainz in 23 and Vettel Hamilton in 18 in the exact same corner. Oh well. So America's Choice, who's very good. He comes in with all the right things, I think. Good man or woman. Bianchi family were racers. They were indeed. There's a great video actually of Lucien Bianchi driving it's a Ferrari of some sort, 250 I think, around the old Spa circuit, talking about it. Worth watching. John Brown says Max has the racecraft of an aircraft carrier. Well, bearing in mind a lot of modern nuclear aircraft carriers, unbelievably nimble and effective. That's obviously a compliment. Here's another super chat. Cameron F1. Thank you, Cameron. You misspeak, Samuel Sanchez. Peter D. Windsor is in fact the goatiest F1 mind to have ever F1'd. Oh, that's very kind, Cameron. That's my friend Cameron. And if anybody has not yet visited Cameron's YouTube channel / audio platforms, they need to do so. Good man. He's got a real job and he squeezes all the Formula One in between. So that's always to be admired, I think, isn't it? Thank you very much, Cam. That's good. Kevin, no you didn't. The onboard shows Max driving into Lando and watching in the mirror up until the time of impact. Max received points on his license for the exact same move, K-Mag at Monaco. Okay, all right, if you say so. Duraki 13, does Lando get a grid penalty for not taking the 5-second penalty? No, I don't think he does. I say think because I'm very unclear about all the sporting regulations these days. And I say that with some confidence because after the Austrian Grand Prix, and when all this was happening, I rang a friend of mine, who should remain nameless, who is part of the organising system of Formula One, very high up. And I asked him a couple of questions about things, regulations. And in both of them, he said, I don't know, good question. So if they're allowed to say that, I can say that. I think my taking on this is that when it is a grid penalty, they say will be applied at the next race. And of course, if that's in the sprint, that means the Grand Prix the next day. Or if it's unqualifying, it means the Grand Prix the next day. It doesn't mean the next race as in next weekend. I made that mistake a few months ago. So I don't think it does. I think it's one of these penalties that doesn't mean anything because he didn't finish the race anyway. But had he finished the race, and of course when they awarded it, he was still in the race. So that's why. So there's a very rude comment there about Max's dad, so I'm not going to put that up because I happen to know Max's dad quite well. And he is what he is. You know, people, I don't know what it is with people is it people in Formula One or people in general, politics, sport, I don't know. But if they don't conform to what is considered to be the norm, they must be something wrong with them. Everybody's different. And I always felt this about Nigel. You know, Nigel used to have a massive number of critics in the British media, all the Formula One teams, Bernie, always criticising Nigel for this or that. This was wrong, he does that, he exaggerates this, I can't do this, you know, everything's wrong. And yet, for me, Nigel, the beauty of Nigel was this unbelievably easy person to read. You knew exactly what he was going to say or think before he said it. And usually it was fairly, you know, different. But you could read it and you could work around it. And if you were working with Nigel in a race team, you accepted him for what he was. An unbelievably fast racing driver who got the absolute best from the racing car. And then you ran him as best you could to get the best from him around that. And you didn't try to change him or mould him to be a driver of another character or of another type. He was what he was. Accept it. And I don't understand why it's still the case today. A lot of people don't like this guy because he behaves like this or does that. He is what he is. Accept it. So I'm just going to go back to the top again. I've got to clear this. I'm not clearing the chat at all. I'm just getting back to the top. So where are we? He's saying here Max will always have to steer. This is Richard Nab. So he always have to steer a bit left to make the apex. I'm not sure that's the case. I think that's what Max would say now, because it's, you know, appropriate. But Max doesn't normally do what I think it was Piero Taruffi christened the transitory curve, and that's one of the great things about him. He doesn't waste time with those transitory curves. But when he needs to, he uses the transitory curve actually to be the move to stop the guy passing him. And as I say, he times it perfectly. And that's why he didn't get a penalty for those, because he absolutely did it perfectly. So, Kevin, the FIA had to hand Max the points on his license. Yeah, well, does anybody care about those points? I don't think it's ever had an effect, has it? To the point where they've exceeded the number of points and they've lost their license for 3 years or whatever it is. I don't ever remember that happening. They always get these points. It sounds terrible. Doesn't mean anything to me. Notty, hi Peter. Do you think Williams, with the investment behind them, really will be an attractive option for Carlos? Secondly, could Bottas accept a 1-year deal at Merck to let Kimi go to Williams first? Wow. Well, the first one, this big investment at Williams. It's so odd at Williams. They're always, half the time they're saying we don't have enough money and resources, so we couldn't afford to take a spare chassis to Australia. On the other hand, they suddenly start hiring people and doing new liveries on the car, which aren't cheap. And so I have no idea. I said at the time, when they didn't have that spare chassis in Australia, for a bank, whatever they are, equity bank, I don't know what sort of bank they are, they don't seem to be spending a lot of money. But now they seem to be spending a lot of money. If I was Carlos, I'd be thinking they're not spending any more money now, obviously, than they were spending before, because if, you know, why wouldn't they have had the money to spend before? They obviously did. So what's going to change? And there's obviously some issue there with not getting things really right. And so I'm going to take the softest option and go to Audi. That's what I would do if I was Carlos Sainz, I think. Unless Alpine with Flavio come up with something that's half attractive. Maybe. I doubt that, though. I don't think I would. I think I'd still go to Audi on the basis that you can grow with that Sauber team. As pitiful as it is at the moment, you can organically grow with them and try and change a few things and get a few good results, and then simultaneously try to kick the whole Audi thing into shape, as I said before. And that's the way for him to go if he doesn't get anything else. But he might take the Williams thing. He might, bank. He's got Albon in the other car. He's got, I don't know. He's just got, it looks like a difficult team to me. For me, that's all I can say. Not the Williams that I used to know, that's for sure. Second point, could Bottas accept a 1-year deal at Merck to let Kimi go to Williams? So what you're saying is Mercedes are desperate to have Kimi in Formula One, but they're not sure that he's the right guy to be alongside George next year. But why wouldn't they be sure? If they think he's the next Ayrton, which presumably they do, otherwise they wouldn't be banging on like a pork chop, as we say in Australia, then why wouldn't they put him in the car prior to the big drama of 26, when it's the new car and you've got to get used to all the new technology and get the best from it? Give him a good year in the back end of this formula, rattling around next to George. Why wouldn't that be a good time to put him in the car? I would, if he's that good. Ayrton went straight from Formula 3 to Tolman. And you'd imagine that the Mercedes next year is going to be a better car than the Tolman Hart was in 1984. So why wouldn't they just put him in the car? What would he do in a Haas or a Williams that he couldn't do in a Mercedes? That's my response to that. So why would they do that? They either believe in him or they don't, I think. I'd love to see Valtteri back there. I would. I'm a bit of a Valtteri fan. I think he'd be a good bloke for Audi, actually, if they gave him a bit more responsibility and give a bit more confidence for the future. I think he'd do quite a good job, not necessarily driving for Audi, but taking that team to the level at which they should be operating. I think he's got a good brain and he knows what he's doing. But a little bit like another Finn, Jari-Matti Latvala, who's doing a very good job now as team principal of Toyota. I can see Valtteri Bottas doing a very good job if he was given the opportunity working alongside, I guess, Andreas Seidel, with Sauber taking Audi to the next generation. So Latvala, Bottas, what do they have in common? I think they have that ability. Had a good chat to Latvala once about how much control he had of the car when he was completely airborne, all four wheels off the ground. And he said, oh yeah, the control is obviously just before the takeoff, but there's lots of ways you can take off. You can do this, that, blah, blah, blah. It was amazing. We spoke for quite a lot of time about the right way to get the car off the ground. They make lighter cars too, Peter. Who's that? Hyundai? Lotus, I think. Milan, as I say. Much lighter than a Formula One car. Yeah, weight is everything, isn't it? I love light cars. Let's have a minimum weight of 650 kilos Formula One next year. 26. Excellent. Let's have a look. I'm past our 2-hour thing now. Dexter's getting antsy. Where are we now? America's Choice. Yeah, brilliant. Every comment America's Choice has made today, and always makes, is absolutely blue chip. Sterling had class. 3 words that actually sum up motor racing in many ways. So, oh, okay. Talking about refueling, Fia Lusitano says the reason he talks about bringing refueling back is to make them lighter. That's what he meant. Yeah, okay. Are they going to be that much lighter? I think the heaviest thing on the car is going to be the batteries, isn't it, in 26, as far as I know. But yeah, it would help a bit. But for just to have a bit of weight saving, they could do it in other ways, I think. So here we go. Radio Paddock F1 says, cheers from Brazil. Cheers to Radio Paddock F1. I'm trying to get hold of Emerson at the moment, actually, if anybody knows how to do that. I sent him an email not so long ago. No reply yet. He's probably busy travelling. But we're doing a thing on the Lotus 72 for the London F1 exhibition. I just wanted to get Emerson and talk a little bit about the 72D and that lovely rear wing that Martin Wade designed, which was basically a rear wing stroke oil tank. Wouldn't be allowed today. Hit the car from the back and the oil goes everywhere. But it was a great solution in 1972. And I remember Peter War saying, oh, I said, wow, that's so cool, Peter, how you've done that. And he said, oh, yeah, it's another of Colin Chapman's brainchilds. He's just looking at the back of the car. And he suddenly thought, there's a big space there. Why don't we make that the oil tank wing? Why don't we put the rear wing on the oil tank? Make the whole thing a wing mounting. Martin, draw it up. And they did. He won the World Championship. Not only because of that, but a beautiful looking car, wasn't it? RSD 250. This is Nicola, another super chat. Ognjanovic. Can you recall the situation between Patrese and Bertrand Gachot in pit lane Monaco 92? Patrese punched him multiple times. Did he? Don't remember that, actually. I was too busy in the garage getting Nigel sorted on something, I think. Bertrand was a bit fiery, wasn't he? Had that drama with the taxi driver in Hyde Park Corner in London, enabling Michael Schumacher to drive the Jordan. I don't remember that punch up with Patrese. I remember Patrese's mum hitting me over the head with an umbrella for spinning at Monza one year, but I don't remember that punch up. Sorry, I have to confess. There's another one here, super chat. Disappeared. There's another one here. Macon says, when supercapacitor tech surpasses battery tech, massive vehicles will probably go down. Until then, these hybrids will remain heavy. So bring on the supercapacitor tech, says Macon. I agree. Yeah, we need that. Never light with batteries. Yeah, I've said that. Bring back V10s. Yeah, thank you, Cameron. Thank you, Cameron. That was the third best super chat that got skipped. Guess that goat doesn't like me. No, Michael Lawless. I'm just about to go up and see if there's any. Here it is, the one I just was about to read and it jumped. From Michael Lawless. Do most top race engineers, GP, Bono, know what it's like to race or compete? Or are they purely technical, academic? Question mark. Did they drive at any point? In other words, are they ex-drivers? My experience and knowledge is that most of them are engineers who have been very, very focused on engineering, virtually from the point they left school. Some of them have done a bit of 750 racing, bit of club racing, things like that, but not a lot more. Then they focus entirely on what they do as engineers. Obviously, there are exceptions. I mean, Tom McCullough at Aston Martin was pretty quick. Steve Nichols, Ayrton Senna's race engineer, was very quick Ford 2000 driver by the time he was engineering Ayrton, which one of the reasons Ayrton loved working with him, because they had Ford 2000 in common. But generally, they're pretty much locked into engineering as distinct from driving, and they're so focused on data, which is why I often say they don't really have the opportunity to, or make the opportunity to go out and actually see what's happening. And that's, that's a shame, I think. But it's just the way the sport has structured itself. That is the way it's done, and so they all do it the same way. I hope in that way I've covered all the super chats. If I could show everybody how this thing looks, they'd understand why it's quite difficult. P. Bishop says, "Hi Peter, what current rule or legislation would you like to see changed to make hard racing easier and better for the drivers and the fans?" I love porridge. Porridge haters have no sense of danger. I love porridge anyway. I remember Jackie Stewart saying, "Oh, if you're going to have porridge, Peter, always get the jumbo-sized oats. Never get the medium-sized oats. Always the jumbo-sized." And I've stuck with that ever since. And having those bigger oats makes a massive difference. The big question is whether to mix it with water or milk. And if it's good milk, nice milk, and we can all have our own choices there. Milk probably has the preference, but water porridge is still very good. Anyway, getting back to it, I would get rid of DRS. I'd get rid of DRS. I think it would massively improve racing. There you go. What does that mean? Have less overtaking. Yeah, but it'll improve the racing. Have less overtaking, but much better racing. That's what I think. Oh, well, that's Windsor just being extreporous. But it's true. Hang on, I saw another super chat there. Read that. Did that one. Yep. Done that. I think I've done all the super chats. If anybody has sent a super chat and haven't read it, I'm very sorry. Apex Twin, agree, it's annoying. They need to keep these regs for the next 10 years. They need to change those so we can say goodbye to DRS, which added to the problems last weekend. Yes, I've got somebody who agrees with me. Brilliant. Thank you very much. So that's a good point on which to end, I think, because I've been banging on about DRS, and I'm starting to get a bit, feeling a little bit unloved that nobody seems to agree with me. But to me, it's such an obvious point. Get rid of it. And we don't have all these ridiculous no-man land situations, or certainly reduce the number of DRS areas, that's for sure. Only have them going into medium-speed corners, maybe. Maybe that's a solution. An interim, short-term solution. Anyway, there we are. So thank you very much again. He says after 2 hours, 10 minutes. Yakking on, as somebody said. Yeah, I've got to get going. Got a lot going on. And of course, it's the British Grand Prix this weekend. So I'll be doing the next 3 videos, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, as normal. Thank you again for your support and for watching this channel. It's been a lot of fun on the live stream today. Thank you to Jetcraft, to OEM Exclusive, and of course to Track Ninja, our new partner as well, for their support of this channel. And please take the trouble to read about these companies in the description. And if you can do anything to further their advance, that would be nice as well. In the meantime, I'll be seeing you on Friday as we report from Silverstone after that first day of running. Take care and stay safe.